Lovely. Oh, well, thanks so much for joining me tonight. It's really nice to see everybody. Um, I just thought I'd give an overview of the project so far. One of my main motivations for doing this was I know, there's a lot of people who give a lot of time to doing monitoring for me, and which is massively appreciated. But I sometimes worry that people think that it's all going into a black hole. Spending days and days, surveying for field gentry and thinking, what's happening, everything I'm doing. So I thought it would just be nice to give an overview of how the monitoring work that volunteers do, how it fits in. And to be honest, it's not just volunteers. There are quite a few other sort of associated organisations and people who work on other projects who are feeding into this. And again, just so everybody can see what's happening with all the time and data that they're giving me. And it is definitely not going into a black hole. So, sorry, I was just having a small teething problem there. Right, got that out of the way. So I just thought to start with, I'd do a little bit of background on the field gentian. It's one of three gentian species that were once widespread in Britain. Got the autumn gentian, which is the most frequent one, although I'll say it's locally frequent rather than widespread over the country. It's definitely, declining in the lowlands, but can still be found in good numbers in the uplands. There's also the marsh gentian, which is very similar to the field gentian in that it's now only found in very localized pockets. And then there's the field gentian, which is either an annual or biennial member of the gentian family. There is a subspecies, which is Baltica, which is described as an annual on the continent. But they've done an analysis here and shown that both biennials and annuals occur. And so there's no justification to separate them in the UK. So we're just calling it one species. There's also, in addition to the three gentian species that were widespread, there's a number of regional species of gentian. There's the spring gentian, which is the one that's well known in Teesdale, Chiltern gentian, fringe gentian, and alpine gentian. And again, those are very localized and often linked sort of the past glaciation events. So they're alpine species that have become sort of localized in this country. So field gentian occurs on unimproved open grasslands. Interestingly, in the uplands, it's usually on calcareous grasslands and on acid grasslands in the lowlands. And it's also found in dune slacks on the coast. So it requires nutrient poor soil. So whether it's on sand dunes, acid grassland, calcareous, the one sort of common factor is low nutrient status. And another requirement for it is to have an open sward. So where either you've got cattle grazing, steep slopes where you're getting landslips or soil creep, or thin skeletal soils over rocky ground. So I've just put in here a couple of examples of typical sites in the uplands. So again, you can see the one on the left is a sort of extensive cattle grazed pasture, but also thin soils. You can see the sort of rocks protruding there. And the picture on the right, again, this is also a cattle grazed site, but you've got this open ground caused by the steep slopes. And again, you can see it's quite a rocky habitat. So obviously the main question is, why are we doing this? And, why am I focusing so much of my time on field gentian? And you can see from these distribution maps the change from before 1970 until the last 10 years, how far north it is creeping. Overall, it's showing one of the fastest declines of any native wildflower, and it's just over 80 known sites remaining in England, with a few more in Wales, and obviously there's still, thankfully, a stronghold in Scotland. More frequent periods of hot weather and drought might be what's responsible for the loss of the southern sites. Last summer in the heat waves, nearly every population in the south failed. I think there were just a couple of plants found on the sites on the Lizard. But it was possibly, you know, a worrying trend that might continue if we're looking at climate change. There's other factors in the lowland too, such as changes in lowland agriculture. There's obviously the continued pressure for grassland improvement, and also the lack of grazing stock in the lowlands. Quite a few extensive or grassland sites end up being unmanaged or very lightly managed, so you're not getting that sort of open cattle graze habitat anymore. Another thing to contend with once you've got small population numbers is the collapse caused by such a small genetic resource. You know, you often find that a small isolated population will just fizzle out because there just isn't sustainable numbers. So the decline, it's not just, I mean, obviously what's happening in the south is worrying, but even in the north, we've got 61 of all the Gentian sites in the north of England, which sounds quite good. But then when you look into the figures and see only 14 of these sites are showing a stable number of plants. The remainder of the sites either have really small numbers or are showing a trend of declining numbers, or they've been, I don't like to say extinct yet, but there's no plants recently found, so there is a risk that they probably have gone extinct. So in the north of England, luckily we haven't, although last summer was very hot and dry, you know, we haven't been quite facing the problems with the drought that the south has seen. In the north of England, the main reason for the loss of field gentian sites is overgrazing. These two pictures here are a really good example of a site. I mean, these are really similar sites. They are different sites, but I can almost guarantee you that the site on the right could look like the site on the left if the grazing levels were adjusted. The site on the right is heavily sheep grazed over a long period of time, so the plants never have a chance to flower and set seed, whereas the site on the left is more extensively grazed. I'm always worried that people will see me as anti-sheep. I'm not completely anti-sheep, but they are a species that you have to be careful with when you're grazing flower-rich pastures. They're great to use in the winter, but they love flowers, and so having high numbers of sheep grazing during the flowering period in the spring and summer will eventually lead to a sward like the one on the right-hand side. We also, though, have, as well as overgrazing, we do have an issue with undergrazing as well. Either sites that have, such as I'll show you in a little bit, along the River Tees, where fencing has had to be put in, and so there's no longer any grazing. Other sites which are maybe difficult to get to, or there aren't cattle numbers readily available to put on. Again, that's an issue for the plant as well. And another more sort of localized one is that some sites, because they also happen to be beauty spots where people like to go, you do get quite a bit of trampling underfoot, which can cause issues. Unlike some plants that are quite resilient to being trodden on, field gentian tends to snap, and that's the end of it for the year. So this is something I sometimes mull over, that again, why am I pouring so much of my time and obviously the SRT, why are we concentrating on one species? When you think about it in the greater scheme of things, it seems such a small thing to worry about, just one plant. But then if you look collectively what's happening, and there's a quote off the Species Recovery Trust website that over the past 200 years, over 400 species have been lost from England alone. And so the Species Recovery Trust aim is to remove 50 species from the edge of extinction in the UK by 2050. And one thing that's interesting to think about is the shifting baselines, and over each generation, the gradual erosion of biodiversity. I've just put here some pictures of lapwing, because I think it's such a great example. So if I see, such as the picture on the right, I see 5, 6 lapwing, I think, oh, that's wonderful. Look at the lapwing. But yet, the previous generation, going 50 years, 60 years ago, I've heard people talk about seeing lapwing numbers in the thousands. But for every generation, there's a new normal, and that becomes quite dangerous because the decline of nature almost becomes normalized because the next generation, they didn't know what it used to be like. So I think that makes me feel better about what I'm doing sometimes. In that, I can feel very focused on one thing where there's so many other things happening in conservation, but actually in the greater scheme, it's just got this importance to ensure that, gradually species aren't dropping off the list. But what the really great thing about getting management right for field gentian is it benefits so many other species, in that a pasture where you've got the grazing levels balanced in terms of, say, summer cattle grazing, small amounts of winter sheep grazing, and overall the sward being allowed to flower and set seed over the spring and summer. This enables so many other plants also to flower and set seed, and this has a knock-on benefit on invertebrate numbers, and so therefore you're really benefiting that ecosystem in terms of the change you're making, by just looking at the one little plant. So the project first started in 2015 with a study. It was down in the south, on the lizard. A study was done into the gentian population there. This was followed in 2016 with another sort of area study on the field gentian in the Yorkshire Dales. And also in 2016, that's when I joined as a volunteer, and I started researching and monitoring the population, firstly in Upper Teesdale, and then spreading my work to cover the Yorkshire Dales area. So I chipped away as a volunteer for the next 3 years, mainly monitoring sites in the Dales and the North Pennines, and just doing a small amount of paperwork on the side, trying to find out a bit more about field gentian and what the issues were surrounding the plant. And then in 2020, I started working on contract, which meant I could then I could put aside some of my other work as a freelance consultant, and spend more time doing this job, and concentrate on this project. One of the first things I did, which coincided well with the lockdown when we're all trapped inside anyway, was building a database of all the known field gentian sites in the north of England, pulling in information from the BSBI databases, county recorders, and the local record centres. This really paid off. I mean, originally we had put together a basic list of 50 field gentian sites, and I managed to get that up to 80, and still I'm adding I keep finding extra chunks of data and adding into this. So that's great that we've extended, the amount of sites that we know are out there. So I won't bore you. I could sit all night and talk about each individual site, because every site we do have is interesting in terms of they're all different. They've all got their own challenges. But I, rather than doing that and us still being here at midnight, if anyone is interested, if you've got a particular area that you'd like to know more about, I'm more than happy, for you to phone me or drop me an email, and I can tell you specific details of the particular area you're interested in. One of the things on my to-do list is to update the map, so I can flick back without causing disaster somewhere. So this map actually hasn't been updated for quite a number of years. It's one of those admin jobs that keeps going on the back of the pile. This is on the Species Recovery Trust website, but I will get round to updating it because there are more sites than what is shown on here. But still they are mainly in clusters with just a few outlying populations. So the main areas in the north of England, we've got the population in Teesdale, and then we've got quite a significant population on the Cumbrian coast around the Arnside area, and then sort of coming inland towards Hatton Roof and extending over to Orton. There's also a few sites north of Penrith, and then we've got a very substantial cluster in the Yorkshire Dales. The most significant site is Ingleborough, which is one of, I think, or maybe the best. I'm always careful about saying that because I think there might be another site we haven't discovered yet, but for now it is the best upland site for Phil Gentian. So that's on the Ingleborough National Nature Reserve. But there's also Wharfdale. There's quite a good cluster of sites up there, and trying to think now where else. Small blank, a blank moment. And then there's one site in Swelldale. So following on from 2020, which was mainly a data collection year, I did get out on my own in the summer to do some site checking, but we held off running any events, again with the uncertainty over COVID. So in 2021, it was sort of back to normal. We ran 2 events, one in the Pennines in Upper Teesdale and one at Malham in the Yorkshire Dales, where we looked at ID features of Phil Gentian habitats and habitat management techniques. What was really great about this event was that it was just a really good chance to meet some like-minded people, and we gained quite a few volunteers from this event, which was brilliant. So, and then 2022, we really started to step things up, which was fantastic. A total of 42 sites were monitored by volunteers and myself over the summer. Which was really good because it was a bit of a nightmare in July because the hot weather came and suddenly the gentian was flowering much earlier than it should have been, which really caught me out. So despite this and the short season with the hot weather, we managed to get to 70% of all the northern sites, which was a brilliant achievement. Some other great things last summer is that 4 new sites were stumbled upon, either whilst on unrelated surveys or whilst walking to a known site. So it's just a heartening feeling as well that there are still more sites out there that we haven't found yet. So the more data we have, the more we learn about this plant. As I mentioned before, we've only got 14 sites in the north of England where I'm happy to, comfortable in saying that the stable sites, I don't foresee any changes there, and I'm confident that those sites will remain good for the future. It's interesting that the common factor in all of these sites is that they're cattle grazed. But we've also, through having data coming in, we've found that the plant does have good and bad years. And I've just pulled out a tiny bit of data here. And what's interesting is they don't correspond. So it seems to be linked to the individual population rather than external factors. So, for example, the population this particular population at Malham is a small population anyway, but you can see in 2019, there was only 3 plants there. Whereas at the Lower Winskill site, that was a really good year for that plant there. So where one year might be bad for one population, it's a good year for another. But when I say good or bad, I mean it doesn't mean I think that the plant's necessarily faring bad. I think, and this is something we haven't fully got to the bottom of, is whether it is always annual or always biennial. And part of the problem is that the rosettes are so tiny, and often you can go out in July and there's just nothing there, and the next time you go, the whole plant's there and it's coming into bud. So it makes it really hard to try and work out what's going on with the plant. And it might be that those years where we record lower numbers than usual for that site is a year where you've got tiny rosettes in the sward that aren't visible. So the plant is still there, but it's just not flowering that year. So the project has 3 overall objectives. One is to build a picture of how the population is faring on each site through annual monitoring. And, like I mentioned before, it's so valuable to have this data and to see what the trend is over a few years. Another objective is to, and again, this feeds back to that, is to try and understand the field Gentian ecology, which, every new sort of chunk of information we learn helps us in terms of looking at restoration and reintroduction techniques. And then finally, the other objective is to protect, restore and reintroduce field Gentian to create a stable population for the future. And again, this all links together into just learning all the time in how to do this, what are the best techniques, and exactly how the plant operates as such. I just put up a couple of pictures here of 2 of the sites we have. The one on the left is just interesting. This is in the Yorkshire Dales, in terms of it grows alongside this footpath and it's just got a sweet spot. So the actual main part of the path, there are no plants there because with the trampling, it's too exposed and there's too much sort of foot traffic on it for the Gentian to exist. But then the other extreme, away from the path, the vegetation gets too tussocky and dense. This particular site isn't currently grazed. And so it's found a sweet spot right on the edge where there's just the right level of disturbance, and it's hanging on along there. So I just find that site quite interesting in it showing sort of how the field Gentian's behaving. And the picture on the right, this is a really typical example, a bit like one of the pictures I showed before, of a site where Gentian is struggling, where it's a heavily sheep grazed pasture, which is quite low in terms of flowering species, or should I say the flowering species are there, but they're generally in vegetative form and they're not able to flower. So we've started from going sort of from 2016 to 2020 and 2021, in that we're just kind of taking a passive approach to the project and just monitoring sites, gathering data. We're now sort of moving into a more proactive stage where we're starting to look at sort of restoration techniques. The picture here on the left, it shows this was done in along the River Tees in Upper Teesdale. This is the Morehouses National Nature Reserve staff and volunteers did this. There's a site along there which in 2020, obviously, again with the lockdowns, we had a lot more visitors in this country, a lot more tourists. And so we were having an issue with trampling on this site. So fence was put up. But in addition to that, this particular site it's because it's on the Pennine Way, the area's been fenced off from livestock to keep people one side of the fence and cattle on the other. So there's no grazing, and that is probably one of the main reasons that Gentian is declining on this site. So the NNR team did a cut and rake in the autumn on this site. And we've only got 1 year's data, so we can't actually say at the moment, oh, this has definitely worked. But considering we had 6 plants in 2017, 7 plants in 2020, and then the following summer after the cut and rake, we had 15 plants, it does look like a positive move. But obviously we need to do more of that to, say for definite that, cutting and raking is a way of helping a field gentian site. Another nice success story we had was up in Upper Wharfdale on National Trust land. There was a site where no plants had been found since 2011, and we got a small bit of funding from the Yorkshire Dales National Park Authority to buy some hurdles. Probably looks really strange, but again, it was just a really good exercise to see whether this would work or not. And I was a bit skeptical because, I'd heard that the seed bank was quite short-lived, but we put up the exclosure, and in the first year we had 5 plants within the exclosure. Again, it might be a one-off, it's only 1 year's data, but it's just heartening to know that some of these actions could be having a positive effect. So again, now we have a good amount of data from the past 7 years of monitoring. We are putting more time into site restoration. So in 2022, we received funding from the Natural England Species Recovery Fund to put together some suggested management plans for a group of privately owned sites within the Yorkshire Dales. This was mainly a desk exercise combined with just some visits just to look at potential restoration works. But we were then lucky enough to receive another round of funding from Natural England for this year, which will enable us to take those plans forward. So again, they're fairly simple things, just in terms of adjusting stocking densities, maybe looking at doing some exclosures. So I'm looking forward to this year working with the landowners to tweak some of these sites and see what happens. We've also been successful with a funding application to Northumbrian Water's Branch Out scheme. This is going to be for a project along the River Tees in Upper Teesdale. The site I showed before is one of the sites. So there's a number of sites along the River Tees which have been affected by the fencing that was put in alongside the riverside path. And here the vegetation is getting long and out competing the field gentian. So we're looking at sort of expanding what's been done by the NNR team in terms of cutting and raking to see if we can revive the population there. But what long term we hope to do there is actually to, if we can get the plants back along the riverside, is actually to use those plants as a seed source and then look for more suitable sites in Upper Teesdale where we could re-establish a field gentian population, because realistically long term we can't keep cutting and raking forever. It isn't feasible for the fence to be removed alongside the riverside path because the volume of people that use the site, and we need to keep people and dogs separate from the livestock and keep everybody safe. So it's going to be easier to hopefully move the field gentian population if we can find some suitable sites. So another part of the project I've started to embark on is the dune sites. So there are 2 dune sites on the eastern side of the country, one at Berwick upon Tweed and one near Holy Island. And then on the western side of the country, we've got a couple of sites in Lancashire and Cumbria. Again, it's a new part of the project. we know very little at the moment about these sites, what the population trends look like, what the threats are, indeed, if there are any threats. So last summer, I visited my first dune site, which was the site. It's almost opposite. It's on a spit of land opposite Lindisfarne or Holy Island. There's been historically a small number of records for the site, and I was really excited to go out there and find a really extensive population. I mean, it was beyond, there was no way I could even start counting it. It's a huge site. It's about a square kilometre, and nearly every dune slack seemed to have at least a small field gentian population in. So that's really exciting, and we're going to be holding recording day this coming August there to start off the field gentian dune project. So, as well as moving forward with the Teesdale Branch Out project, we've also got the Yorkshire Dales Natural England project and the Sand Dune project starting this summer. Also, plans include more site monitoring and trying to prioritise sites that we've not yet visited. We're also spending some time looking into ex situ propagation and potentially using pot-grown plants for reintroduction. As always, I'm really grateful for the time given by the volunteers to check sites. This project could not happen without you. There's only one of me. I'm very thinly spread on the ground, and it's a picture of my son there. I'm having to use child labour in the summer months to try and make the time up. My son has a really interesting idea for markers. He wants to use toy dogs, so that could be one for the future. I prefer flags. He likes little dogs. So anyway, if you'd like to take on a site to monitor, I'd love to hear from you. No experience is necessary. What we can do if you're not confident, or indeed if you're starting out in botanising, is that we can buddy you up with an experienced site surveyor until you feel confident to go at it. But at the Species Recovery Trust, as myself, we've got a volunteer officer as well. We can offer plenty of support to help. So just want to say thank you for listening to me. I really, long term, what I'm aiming to do is to do myself out of a job. Whether that will happen in my lifetime, I don't know, but I'm really hoping that one day I'll be able to step down and know that we've got a secure field gentian population, that and people have adopted local sites that are being monitored, the data's being fed into databases, and I have very little to do, but we'll see how that goes. I think there's a little while yet. So really, it's just if you'd like to put your microphones back on, and if you'd like to ask any questions, I'd be very happy to hear those.
I've got one, Claire.
Okay.
Can you hear me? Yes?
I can.
On slide 11, you gave some population figures for the Kilnsey site. Is that ox pasture?
Oh, what's that on the slide? I'll just hang on.
Slide 11. Yeah.
That one, Kilnsey. No, so that's the other one. There's one about 10 minutes walk towards Littondale.
Okay. Yeah. I thought. Well, I don't know about that second one, that second site you mentioned, but I thought if that was ox pasture, your figures are out.
Yeah, well, I know I got your figures from ox pasture last year, which are incredible. That's a really exciting site.
Yeah.
So
I didn't know about the plants at Yokenthwaite, Wharfdale.
Oh, right.
It's an area where I'm in that area quite regular, cycling and walking, and I'm quite happy to have another look at that area this year and see what the plants are doing like if you want, and I'll get back to you.
Yeah, that would be lovely. So the National Trust Rangers have put up, as far as I know, they've put that exclosure back up again this year.
Well, it wasn't there a couple of weeks ago when I went past.
Oh, was it not?
I noticed 4 stakes in the ground sticking out about 15 centimetres, and I thought, oh, that's curious. I wonder what they're about, you see.
Okay. No, well, thanks for the heads up. Right. Well, I better message them because yeah, we'd like that to go up. I mean, I don't know if this is the case this year, but last year there was an issue. We had to delay putting the exclosure up because they were filming there for All Creatures Great and Small.
That's right, yeah.
Apparently they didn't want a Phil Gentian exclosure in the background, so don't know why not, but
the other thing is lower wind skill. I'm happy to keep checking that for you if you want.
oh, that would be fantastic
I've
if
had
you
a good
could.
relationship with Tom, so
Oh, brilliant. No, that's lovely. You know, like I said before, it's just the more data we get, it's so useful in terms of, helping us with the project. So yeah, thank you.
No worries. I shall have to leave you now, I'm afraid, because I've got to get off up the Yorkshire Dales.
Nice.
Thank you for the talk. It was excellent.
Oh, good. Well, thank you for coming along.
No worries.
Yeah, it's nice to put a face to a name.
Yes. Thank you and goodbye, everybody. Bye.
Bye, Howard.
Bye. Bye, Steve.
Don't know if anyone else has got any more questions.
Hello, Claire.
Oh, hi.
Hi. I'm sorry, I had some problems. I first didn't find the link to join this presentation, so I had time to send you email and ask for you to send me the link, but then I found it, so you can just ignore my email. So I think I missed maybe only a couple of minutes. But anyway, I just want to thank you for this comprehensive presentation. It was very interesting to hear all this background for your projects and the situation of Phil Gentian all around England, not just in Yorkshire, like we have been discussing before in our review meetings. And also, it was very nice to hear that how well your project is going and how well you are going to you seem to do with the Phil Gentian, and hope it will give good results by the end of our current refunding period. I was also going to, because unfortunately Phil wasn't able to attend this presentation today. I was wondering, you are recording this event, so I was wondering whether I can give the link to that to Phil, so he's happy to.
Absolutely. I'll email it through afterwards.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you.
Well, it's lovely to see you. Thanks for coming along tonight.
Of course, of course.
Lovely. Well, if everyone's happy and there's no more questions, I'll stop recording, and I'll just thank everyone again for thank you for coming tonight. It's much appreciated, and hopefully catch up with everybody at various points over the summer.
Thank you.
Thank you, Claire.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.